Hey, it's Soul with some Shadowlands critical feedback. Today I'm going to focus on what I want and hope to be one of Shadowlands' more memorable features, Torghast, the Tower of the Damned. Those of you who've watched me have seen gameplay footage and streams and guides and more on how it works and how my thoughts on it have meandered over the past few months. So this piece will assume that you know the ins and outs of how Torghast works. Today I will commit to a review of Torghast as it is in the Shadowlands beta, with a bit of praise, but mostly critical feedback and suggestions to ensure that this feature is all that we've ever dreamed. Ooh. Of course, I'm aware that I'm publishing this video on the day of a beta build, knowing that what I share today may lose some of its context, but I hope that you give this a listen anyway because, well, I've got more to say than just make it more challenging. First, what have I really enjoyed about Torghast? Blizzard's let their imagination run totally wild in this place thanks to anima powers, the enhancements that turn you from a mere titan-killing champion to a ridiculous and unstoppable juggernaut. There's a feeling of power here that you'd almost never see outside of Torghast, and only a taste of that comes in the form of legendary powers that are just echoes of the overpoweredness inside the tower. It's just straight up fun. Of course though, like everything that's repetitive, despite the randomness of floors and mob placement and powers, Torghast will lose its luster. Fortunately, the biggest takeaway from it, which are legendary crafting materials, is only as required as is your desire for legendaries. Since you can target what you can make, in theory, Torghast is an activity you can eventually graduate from so you can move on to other things. That's also something to appreciate. Blizzard's been listening and responding to a lot of feedback. Notably, the tower is no longer restricted by keys, as in, once you've completed this attunement, all max level characters on your account are free to enter the tower with no restrictions. A small drawback though, this encourages some edge case behavior. If you start a climb and you don't see a floor or a power that you like, you can just leave and then start again. Even if re-rolling that first power over and over again isn't ideal, I find that quirk to be a lot better than the anxiety of botching a climb or disconnecting or something and then losing that key. The best part is that this is one less barrier to play with your friends and guildmates now that you don't have to worry about someone not having a key or if someone were to run out of them. Earlier, a feature called Torments launched with Torghast, which created a sort of timer or a dampening effect that made slower climbs more punishing. After a lot of feedback or, well, pushback, Blizzard knocked this down a few pegs and turned Torments into more like a stacking debuff based on how many floors you've climbed. So there's a possibility you could end up with 15 stacks of a certain debuff if you're really unlucky on a long climb, but at least at the moment, it's not nearly as impactful as you think. Also, thanks to some strong feedback, Torghast has been separated into two types of runs, or climbs. The first is a 6th-floor climb that gives players the currency used to make legendaries, because Torghast, like many things in the world of Warcraft, offer rewards that loop into other activities. The other type of climb, which is my favorite, is one that is more for enrichment and fun. An 18-floor climb up an assortment of floors, and you're rewarded with cosmetics, to which I have no idea what they are at the moment. Woo! Farming for a legendary borrows a little bit from horrific visions in patch 8.3. The farther you climb, the more currency that you get, and potentially you can climb the highest layer of Torghast, complete it, and collect all the rewards from the layers that you skipped. Theoretically, we'll be able to maximize our rewards with 2 runs of Torghast each week, because there are 2 randomly chosen cell blocks on a rotation. So that takes care of my praise of Torghast as it is, but now let's get into the meat of things. Let's get into what my concerns for Torghast are, starting with its biggest issue, which is also its smallest. It's too easy. For example, I've climbed layer 8 of the Twisting Corridors, the highest difficulty possible in Torghast, and within the first 3 floors, I already had enough strength and powers to pretty much blow through all but the nastiest bosses. I should also add that my item level is a mere 142 in this screenshot here, which is pretty much what you would be at as a fresh max level character. For further context, dungeon gear starts at an item level of 157. So I believe I shouldn't be able to take more than a few steps into the highest level of Torghast before getting my ass melted. In case you're still not convinced, here's a comparison to mobs out in the Maw compared to the Twisting Corridors on Layer 8. The HP differences are pretty minimal, but in so few words, outdoor content is more difficult than the highest level Torghast run. It's painfully clear that this is going to be addressed before going live, but it's worth pointing out so I could, cover my ass. An easy suggestion to make would be to tune Layer 1 into something close to Layer 8, and then use that as a starting point. Now, you might be thinking, oh, well, I must be biased because of my experience in the instance, and experience with handling mobs and traps is very advantageous, but let's try and understand the design behind Torghast difficulty. Torghast, whether it's a 6 or an 18 floor climb, is meant to be a race between the scaling mob difficulty and the anima powers that we gain. As we climb, there's meant to be what Blizzard developers have described as a seesaw effect between player power and mob scaling, to have us feel powerful at first, but by the end still feel challenged despite the power that we've gained. Based on that philosophy, I'm going to guess that it would be helpful to accelerate mob scaling as it is right now, because anima powers get out of control very, very quickly, and right now they totally outpace the scaling. As for the difference between difficulty between layers, I think it best to tune layers to certain item level brackets at the very beginning. But depending on the layer that you choose, the mob scaling should grow. So let me try to illustrate this. So like, for example, layer 1 has a mob item level of 140, and each floor raises their item level by like 5 for each and every floor. But layer 8, if you start there, that has a starting mob level of like 190. And each floor raises the item level by 10, and then 12, and then 14. That's an overly simplistic way of describing it, but hopefully you get the drift, accelerating the scale depending on the layer. I totally get that this is a big challenge because it only takes a few lucky anima powers to nail that killer build and to trivialize the entire climb, but I think that there are too few opportunities to fail right now. No one likes to fail, for sure, but without that bit of friction and that urgency, that thrill of being at the edge of death, and without keys, Torghast will end up being less challenge and more chore. A feature that helps you to win, which should be totally okay at a certain difficulty. The problem is that at the moment, that's all there is. And for all the extra powers and features that will come to Torghast in the future, this first impression is critical. It's super important. But again, tuning is Torghast's biggest and smallest issue. Those can be changed with hotfixes, right? So let's move on to some bigger fish. Phantasma is the temporary currency of Torghast, meant to buy powerful items, extra lives, and anima powers to help you and your team along the way. At the moment, there's too much Phantasma available and not enough to spend it on, which is also to say that exploring and killing every mob that you see is totally worth it. There are anima powers and legendaries that increase the Phantasma that we earn, which compounds this small issue, but this contributes to the power bloat that I mentioned in Torghast to a point where the first 2 floors of a climb might be the toughest, but once you get to that third, where the vendors are and you jack yourself up with anima powers, you bust into that 4th floor like a beast, and that feels like a bit too much of a difference. The best suggestion that I have there is to greatly increase the cost of items from the vendor, especially the anima cells, because they benefit not just you, but your whole party if you're not alone, while the other items and powers have a finite number to them. I remember during an interview when one of the developers pointed out that in a given Torghast group, maybe one person could be designated to be the broker, who earns more Phantasma than anyone else, and they would be the person who buys those anima cells. Otherwise, no one would be able to afford them separately. I think that's more engaging than having everything at your fingertips. Earlier, I mentioned some edge case behavior, where someone would walk into Torghast, see that the first anima power was pretty meh, and then walk out to try again. The removal of keys from Torghast has made it pretty clear that Blizzard's okay enough with this, because there's so many powers in Torghast anyway, it would be the only player's fault to waste all this time re-rolling for a good power. But of course, you're welcome to do it anyway. Yes! However, I think there's something more important to look out for, and that's the floor type, to which there are 6. If in a given week, Coldheart Interstitia is available as one of the cell blocks to climb, or if it happens to be the first floor that you climb in the Twisting Corridors, rejoice and hop right in. Because in this case, your mission is to save up enough Phantasma, however much that's going to be, and buy a Ravenous Anima Cell by the time you get to that vendor floor. Because on this floor type, using an Anima Cell on the Dark Kyrian peoples will grant you this power, Dark Armaments, which increases your haste by a flat 25% for 10 seconds, and it stacks up to 10 times, meaning literally 250% bonus haste, which if you've seen my streams makes you pretty darn stupid. Now, the solve for this is pretty simple. Just nerf Dark Armaments so that this bonus is less. Maybe it's multiplicative and not additive. Although nearly tripling your current haste is still pretty good, right? The point is that rerolling Torghast runs just so you can get the floor type that gives you the best power to steal isn't ideal, because this is arguably easier to do and it threatens to create a Torghast starting meta. Dark Armaments are way overpowered and should be nerfed anyway, as much as I love using them. But also, not all floors are made equal. In Mortregar and the Soul Forges, there are powers that you can steal that are very useful to handle that floor type. On the other hand, Skoldus Halls, Fractured Chambers, and the Upper Reaches have powers that aren't nearly as exciting or useful. Without changes, you're going to find these to be the ranking among floors that are the most to the least fun to start off at first. I probably put in just about 100 hours into Torghast, and I've yet to see an instance where our Covenant choices made a difference in the environment. I recall something about opening doors, and I've seen some evidence of this, but nothing that really says that I need to be in a certain Covenant. I remember Special Covenant perks to be one of the features of Torghast as it was announced, and to be honest, I'm only bringing this up because Blizzard brought it up first. I really don't think this is a big deal, as if our Covenant choices need to be vaunted and shoved in our face at every turn, and it already is. But now let me get to my actual biggest gripe with Torghast, and it's this. It's the 8 levels of difficulty. Just 8. And that feels a little bit insulting. As you recall, there are 2 types of runs in Torghast, the 6th floor climb and the 18th floor climb, and each has its own reward structure to give you legendary stuff or cosmetic stuff. I have no problem with the 6th floor climb because there's a certain purpose to it, farming legendaries. And I imagine most people climbing Torghast just for that wouldn't care to go any higher, and that's totally okay. But there's a reason why Torghast is separated into 2 kinds of climbs, because there are people who just want to climb it for fun. There have been many outspoken testers out there whose main complaint about Torghast is that there isn't enough Torghast. They missed the early alpha, when you can climb nearly 50 floors in one sitting, straight drunk, off of hundreds of anima powers, and on a rampage for nothing but the joy of killing. I happen to not be one of those people, but with the Twisting Corridors being only so long of a climb, I'm often left wanting. Like, here I am. Okay, I'm getting excited now. Here I am. Right? I'm climbing 17 floors, gaining power, almost enough to literally auto-attack a boss to death because my power has grown to such heights. Yeah! And then I leave. It's done. That's an incredible opportunity that is wasted. What's missing is an added challenge to take these powers that I've obtained from these floors and really put it to the test. A single boss on the 18th floor, that's hardly enough for me to flex. So what I'm asking for is, after that 18th floor, is the option to leave, of course, but also the option to continue for an unlimited climb. No floor limit. But I'm not asking for more rewards. I'm not asking for additional powers to drop or to be bought from the vendor, just to take this build that I made and then challenge it until the Terra Group brings a violent end to my adventure. Maybe I'll manage to climb another 10 floors, or 20, or 30, or more. Just give me that chance to end in a blaze of, well, bloody glory. And what's the point of 8 layers, right? It makes this UI look pretty bad when you see 6 options on one page and then 2 more on the other. In fact, I hope that I'm embarrassing myself right now because this UI had already been replaced by the time you watch this. But Torghast shouldn't be limited to 8 layers. The rewards can definitely be limited to 8 layers, just like Mythic Plus rewards cap out. In fact, I don't see why the philosophy of Mythic Plus doesn't apply here too. Because out there you see teams of talented players pushing themselves to the limit, building a meta around the highest difficulties of Mythic Plus. Why not challenge solo players and small groups here too? Let players start at layers 9 or 10 or higher. Not so they can get more soul, ash, or stygia or whatever the heck. Let them start higher so they can brag that they made it through the impossible. And then let them climb past that 18th floor, I'm like compounding on ideas now, and let them push builds that defy imagination. And then you know what, put it on a leaderboard too. Okay, I know I'm pushing it now, but hey, there's always patch 9.1. Blizzard relented to pressure to give players the twisting corridors, this version of Torghast for cosmetic rewards and plain old fun. But now let's pressure them to improve this feature and expand on the fun even further. That wraps up my feedback and suggestions, and I'm truly grateful that you made it to the end. My request and call to action of you, the viewer who made it to the end, is to not just like the video to get this out there, but to forward it to your Twitter feeds and your forums and your whatevers, so Blizzard can take even just a little bit of inspiration and maybe apply it. And don't forget to comment too. Leave your feedback from your testing or your observations on how to make Torghast better. And I guess, subscribe for more of this and all things Warcraft. But I'll see you next time, everyone. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.